A powerful attorney discovers her mute daughter whispering to the school janitor, a broken man hiding secrets that could either heal their shattered family or destroy what little trust remains between a mother and child who've forgotten how to speak to each other. Welcome to tonight's story. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The fluorescent lights of Lincoln Elementary buzzed like dying insects as Cassandra Hale's heels clicked against the polished linoleum with military precision. At 34, she commanded boardrooms with the same ruthless efficiency that had made her the youngest senior partner at Morrison & Associates. Her tailored charcoal suit was armor, her briefcase a weapon, and her perfectly controlled blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into permanent severity. She was late. Again. The parent-teacher conference had been scheduled for 4:30, and it was now 4:47. 17 minutes that felt like an eternity when you were already failing as a mother. Though Cassandra would never admit such weakness aloud. Failure wasn't in her vocabulary, hadn't been since she'd clawed her way out of a trailer park in Ohio to become one of Chicago's most feared litigators. Mrs. Hale, the voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, Lila's second-grade teacher, who appeared in the hallway like a specter of maternal disappointment. At 62, she'd seen enough broken children to recognize the signs, the ones who carried their parents' wars in their small shoulders, who aged too quickly in their bright, hollow eyes. Ms. Hale, Cassandra corrected automatically. She'd reclaimed her maiden name after the divorce, shedding her ex-husband's identity like a snake sheds skin. I'm sorry I'm late. Court ran over. Court always ran over. Life always ran over. Everything except the one thing that mattered most, the 7-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a word in 8 months. Of course. Mrs. Patterson's smile was practiced professional. Shall we discuss Lila's progress? Progress. What a beautifully optimistic word for a child who'd retreated so far into silence that sometimes Cassandra wondered if her daughter was disappearing entirely, one quiet day at a time. They walked toward the classroom, passing bulletin boards covered in crayon masterpieces and construction paper turkeys. Other children's laughter echoed from the after-school program down the hall, sounds of normalcy that felt as foreign to Cassandra as speaking Mandarin. How has she been at home? Mrs. Patterson asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Quiet, Cassandra replied, because what else was there to say? That her daughter moved through their North Shore mansion like a ghost, that mealtimes were exercises in frustrated one-sided conversations, that Cassandra had tried everything, therapy, medication, bribes, threats, and nothing had worked. She's been making some progress here, Mrs. Patterson said carefully. Small steps, but... She trailed off as they rounded the corner, and both women stopped dead in their tracks. Through the open doorway of the supply closet, they could see Lila sitting cross-legged on the floor, next to a tall man in a janitor's uniform. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair showing hints of premature gray, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was lean, angular, marked by the kind of weariness that came from carrying invisible weights. But it wasn't the man that made Cassandra's breath catch in her throat. It was the sound. Her daughter was whispering, not just moving her lips in the silent pantomime that had become their new normal, but actually producing sound. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakably real. Words. Lila was speaking words to this stranger, this custodian who had somehow accomplished what months of expensive therapy couldn't. Who is that? Cassandra's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. That's Mr. Cross, Mrs. Patterson whispered back. Our night janitor. He's been here about 6 months. Very quiet, keeps to himself, but the children seem to gravitate toward him. Cassandra watched transfixed as the man Ethan Cross nodded seriously at whatever Lila was telling him. His movements were gentle, deliberate, as if he understood that loud noises or sudden gestures might shatter this fragile moment. He handed Lila a small yellow flower, a dandelion from the playground, and she actually smiled. When was the last time Cassandra had seen her daughter smile? "Mr. Cross?" Mrs. Patterson called softly. Both Lila and the janitor looked up and the spell was broken. Lila's face immediately closed off, the smile vanishing, as if it had never existed. She scrambled to her feet and moved to hide behind Ethan's legs, peering out at her mother with wide, wary eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than Cassandra expected. Her own daughter was afraid of her. Ethan Cross stood slowly, his expression unreadable. Up close, Cassandra could see the careful distance he maintained, the way he positioned himself to seem less threatening. There was something almost clinical about it, as if he'd learned through necessity how to make himself smaller. Ms. Hale," his voice was surprisingly cultured, lacking the rough edges she'd expected. "I'm Ethan Cross. Why is my daughter talking to you?" The question came out harsher than she'd intended, but Cassandra was beyond caring about social niceties. 8 months of silence, and this stranger had accomplished the impossible in what? A few weeks. "Mom." Lila's voice was barely a whisper, but it might as well have been a shout. Both adults froze, staring down at the little girl with her wild curls and enormous brown eyes that looked so much like her father's that sometimes Cassandra had to look away. "Hi, baby." Cassandra's voice cracked despite her best efforts. She knelt down, trying to make herself less intimidating, less like the hard-edged woman who could reduce opposing counsel to tears. "Were you talking to Mr. Cross?" Lila nodded, then immediately looked at Ethan, as if seeking permission. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You can tell her." "We were talking about flowers," Lila whispered so softly that Cassandra had to strain to hear. "He knows all their names, and he said some people are like flowers too. They need the right kind of light to grow." Cassandra felt something crack inside her chest. When had her daughter become so wise? When had she learned to speak in metaphors that cut straight to the heart of things? That's beautiful, sweetheart." Cassandra looked up at Ethan, trying to understand. "Are you a teacher, Mr. Cross?" Something flickered across his face, pain maybe, or regret. "Not anymore." "But you were?" A long pause. Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably beside them, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "I was a speech therapist," Ethan said finally. Before what?" But he was already stepping back to creating distance. "I should get back to work. The night shift starts soon." "Wait." Cassandra stood, her courtroom instincts kicking in. This man had information she needed, answers to questions that had been eating her alive for months. "My daughter hasn't spoken since her father and I divorced. 8 months of silence. I've tried everything, therapists, specialists, medications. Nothing worked. And then in 5 minutes with you—" "It wasn't 5 minutes," Lila said quietly, surprising them all. "Mr. Cross listens, really listens, like the flowers do." "Flowers listen?" Cassandra asked. "To the rain," Lila explained with the patience of someone addressing a particularly slow adult. "To the sun, to what they need to grow." "Most people don't listen like that. They're too busy talking." The words hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Too busy talking. Is that what she'd been doing wrong? Filling every silence with words, with questions, with demands, that Lila returned to the way things were before. "I should go." Ethan said again, more firmly this time. Mr. Cross. Cassandra's voice carried the authority that made junior associates tremble. I'd like to speak with you. Privately. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking. She softened her tone, remembering her audience. Please. My daughter clearly trusts you, and I need to understand why. Ethan looked down at Lila, who was still partially hidden behind his legs. What do you think, kiddo? Should I talk to your mom? Lila considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Finally, she nodded. She's scary sometimes, but she's not mean. Just loud. Loud. Another arrow to the heart. Okay then. Ethan looked back at Cassandra. But not here. Too many echoes. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should take Lila to the library. There are some new books that just came in. Can I come back tomorrow? Lila asked Ethan. To hear more about the flowers. If your mom says it's okay. All eyes turned to Cassandra. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to say no. To take her daughter home and find a proper therapist, someone with credentials and references and liability insurance. But smart and safe hadn't worked for 8 months. We'll see, she said, which was mother speak for probably yes, and they all knew it. After Mrs. Patterson led Lila away, Cassandra found herself alone with Ethan Cross in a school hallway that suddenly felt too small. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders held tension, like a physical weight. This was a man who'd known loss, she realized. It was written in the careful way he moved, the guarded expression that never quite relaxed. My office, she suggested. I don't think your office is the right environment for this conversation, he said, already walking toward the exit. There's a coffee shop on Miller Street. Lou's. Do you know it? She didn't. Cassandra's world consisted of high-end restaurants and corporate boardrooms, not neighborhood coffee shops where real people conducted real conversations. I'll find it, she said. 7 o'clock, after my shift. Mr. Cross. He paused at the door. Thank you. For whatever you did with Lila. I know I came across as intense. You came across as a mother who's been watching her child disappear, he said quietly. I understand that feeling. And then he was gone, leaving Cassandra alone with the echo of his words and the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, her daughter could be saved. Lou's coffee shop was exactly the kind of place Cassandra had never set foot, in mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the comfortable chaos of a business that prioritized community over profit. She felt overdressed in her power suit, but she'd come straight from the office and hadn't had time to change. Ethan was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of black coffee and a dog-eared paperback novel. He'd changed out of his work uniform into jeans and a gray sweater that brought out his eyes. He looked younger somehow, less guarded, though she could still see the wariness in the way he watched her approach. Thank you for coming, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. I almost didn't. He closed the book. She caught a glimpse of the title, something by Wendell Berry, and folded his hands around his coffee cup. I generally try to avoid getting involved. But you got involved with Lila. Kids are different. They don't have agendas. The implications stung, but Cassandra couldn't argue with it. She did have an agenda: get her daughter back. Get their life back to something resembling normal. What can I get you? The waitress was maybe 19 with purple streaks in her hair and the kind of genuine smile that Cassandra hadn't seen directed at her in years. Coffee. Black. Cassandra wasn't here to eat. You sure Lou makes a killer apple pie? Everything from scratch. Just coffee. The girl shrugged and wandered off, and Cassandra immediately regretted being so brusque. Another person who would file her under uptight bitch and move on with their day. "She's not wrong about the pie," Ethan said mildly. "I'm not here for pie, Mr. Cross. I'm here because you somehow got my daughter to speak, and I need to know how." "It's not a technique you can learn in a weekend seminar," he said. "It's about time, patience, listening without trying to fix." I listened to her. "Do you—" His gaze was steady, not accusatory, but not gentle either. "Or do you listen for what you want to hear, for signs that she's getting better, that she's going back to who she was before?" Cassandra felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Of course I want her to get better. She's my daughter." "And what if this is better? What if the silence isn't a problem to be solved, but a space she needed to create? She's 7 years old. 7-year-olds should be chattering non-stop about playground drama and cartoon characters. They shouldn't be." She gestured helplessly. "Silent." "Why do you think she stopped talking?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Cassandra knew the party-line children of divorce often regressed acting out their confusion and pain in various ways. Lila's chosen method was simply more dramatic than most. "The divorce," she said finally. "Her father and I, it was ugly. Lots of fighting, lots of lawyers. We tried to keep her out of it, but kids hear everything." "What did she hear?" Cassandra's coffee arrived, giving her a moment to consider her answer. What had Lila heard Cassandra screaming at James about his affairs? His drinking, his complete inability to be the man she'd married, James, shouting back about her coldness, her ambition, her need to control everything, including him. She heard two people who used to love each other tear each other apart, she said quietly. And then James moved to California. He sees her every other weekend when he's in town, which isn't often. His new wife is pregnant, so... She shrugged, trying for casual indifference and failing. Lila's old news. "But you don't think it's just the divorce?" It wasn't a question, and Cassandra found herself looking into those storm-gray eyes and feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with legal strategy or professional posturing. "No," she admitted. "I think it's me." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, in a way that made Cassandra want to take them back immediately. She didn't do vulnerable. Vulnerable was dangerous. Vulnerable was how you ended up betrayed and broken, and starting over at 34 with a daughter who looked at you like you were a stranger. "Tell me about before," Ethan said gently. "Before the divorce. What was Lila like?" She was... Cassandra's throat tightened unexpectedly. She was sunshine, always talking, always curious about everything. She'd follow me around the house asking a million questions, and I'd get so frustrated because I was trying to work, trying to focus, and she just wanted attention. And now I'd give anything to hear her ask me just one question. The admission came out strangled, and Cassandra had to look away. I was a terrible mother even before the divorce. Always working, always distracted. James used to say I loved my career more than my family, and maybe he was right. Is that what you think? I think I don't know how to be anything else. I've been fighting my whole life, fighting to get out of poverty, fighting to succeed, fighting to prove I belonged in rooms full of men who thought I was decoration. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to stop fighting, even with my own daughter. The confession hung between them, and Cassandra braced herself for judgment, for the kind of platitudes people offered when they had no real understanding of the situation. Instead, Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those two perceptive eyes. "You said you were a speech therapist," she said, finally needing to shift the focus away from her failures. "What happened?" Why are you working as a janitor? Something shuddered in his expression, and she immediately regretted the question. But after she'd laid herself bare, it seemed fair to ask for some reciprocity. My wife, he said eventually. Sarah. She had early-onset Alzheimer's, diagnosed at 31. Cassandra's breath caught. God, I'm sorry. It's a specific kind of hell. He continued, his voice carefully controlled. Watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. The disease took her language. First words became harder to find. Then sentences became fragments. Then fragments became silence. But you were a speech therapist. Surely you could. That's what I thought. That's what everyone thought. Here's this expert, this professional who specializes in helping people find their voices. Surely he can save his own wife. His laugh was bitter. Turns out expertise means nothing when the person you love can't remember your name. Cassandra felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of shared pain that she hadn't expected. How long? 3 years from diagnosis to... He gestured vaguely. The end. She died 2 years ago. Pneumonia technically, but really she just left. Her body finally followed where her mind had already gone. I can't imagine. I hope you never can. He took a sip of his coffee, using the moment to compose himself. After the funeral, I couldn't go back to work. Couldn't sit in therapy sessions helping other people communicate when I'd failed so completely with the person who mattered most. So I ran. Sold everything, got in my car, and drove until I found a place that felt far enough away from the life I'd lost. And you ended up here, cleaning floors. There's something peaceful about janitorial work, he said, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Clear expectations, measurable results. You clean something, it's clean. No ambiguity, no wondering if you're doing enough or if you're making things worse by trying. Cassandra understood that more than she cared to admit. The appeal of simple tasks with concrete outcomes when your real life felt like an endless series of failures and second guesses. But Lila changed that, she said. She made you get involved again. Lila didn't give me a choice. His expression softened. She started following me around during recess, not saying anything, just being there, watching. And one day, she handed me this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded and refolded until it was soft as fabric. Cassandra leaned forward as he unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing in crayon, a stick figure man in blue, his janitor's uniform, she realized, standing next to a much smaller stick figure with wild brown curls. They were surrounded by flowers, dozens of them in every color Lila could find. She gave this to me 3 weeks ago, Ethan said. Didn't say a word, just handed it over and walked away. But the message was clear. She saw me, not as a broken man or a failed husband, or someone running from his past, just as someone who might understand what it felt like to be alone. And you started talking to her. I started listening to her. There's a difference. Explain the difference. Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Most adults, when they interact with children, they're trying to guide the conversation somewhere, toward a lesson or a goal or a desired outcome. They ask leading questions, they interrupt, they correct. They listen for what they want to hear. And you don't. I listen for what she needs to say. Sometimes that's words, sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's a story about flowers that's really about feeling invisible. The key is being present without having an agenda. Cassandra thought about her interactions with Lila over the past 8 months. The constant questions: how was school? Are you feeling better? Do you want to talk about Daddy? Can you tell Mommy what's wrong? All of them designed to extract information to fix the problem, to move them toward some mythical destination called normal. "I've been doing it all wrong," she said quietly. "You've been doing what every parent does, trying to protect your child from pain. But sometimes the pain is necessary. Sometimes it's how we grow." She's 7 years old. She shouldn't have to grow through pain. No, she shouldn't. But she is. And your job isn't to make the pain go away, it's to make sure she doesn't have to face it alone. The simple truth of it hit Cassandra like a physical blow. For 8 months, she'd been so focused on fixing Lila that she'd forgotten to simply be with her, to sit in the silence and let her daughter feel whatever she needed to feel without trying to rush her through it. "Will you help me?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended, stripped of her usual authority and control. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the mother she needs." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing options, considering risks. Getting involved with them would mean abandoning the careful distance he'd maintained since his wife's death. It would mean opening himself up to caring again, to the possibility of more loss. "I'm not a therapist anymore," he said finally. "I can't offer you professional services or guarantees or insurance-approved treatment plans. I don't want professional services. I want someone who understands, someone Lila trusts. And what happens when she gets better, when she doesn't need me anymore?" The question caught Cassandra off guard. In all her planning and strategizing, she hadn't considered the endgame. What did happen when Lila found her voice again? Did Ethan Cross disappear, back into the shadows, his purpose served? "I don't know," she admitted. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "You should, because I won't be a temporary fix for your family, Ms. Hale. If I agree to help, it's because I believe Lila deserves more than a quick solution. She deserves someone who'll be there for the long haul, through the setbacks and the breakthroughs and everything in between." "Are you saying you want to be that person?" He was quiet for so long that Cassandra began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm saying I think maybe we could help each other." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of possibility that had nothing to do with therapy or professional relationships. Cassandra felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, not just hope, but attraction. This man with his careful hands, and his patient eyes, and his understanding of what it meant to love someone and lose them piece by piece. The thought terrified her. "What would that look like?" she asked carefully. "Helping each other? I'm not sure yet, but I think it starts with you learning to sit in the silence without trying to fill it. And maybe—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "Maybe it starts with you letting Lila see that it's okay to be broken sometimes, that you don't have to be perfect to be loved." The words hit too close to home, and Cassandra felt her defenses slam back into place. "I'm not broken." "No. Then why are you here asking a janitor to help you connect with your own daughter?" The challenge in his voice made her want to fight back, to fall into the familiar pattern of attack and defend that had defined her interactions with James. But something in Ethan's expression stopped her, not judgment, but understanding. He wasn't trying to wound her. He was trying to help her see. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'm broken. Happy. It's not about being happy or sad. It's about being honest. With yourself, with Lila, with what this is really about." "What is it really about?" Ethan leaned back in his seat, studying her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "It's about a little girl who stopped talking because she was afraid her words might hurt someone she loves. And it's about a mother who's forgotten that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all." The truth of it settled between them like a bridge connecting two people who'd both lost their way in different but parallel struggles. Cassandra felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten it was there. "Okay," she said simply. "What do we do now?" Ethan smiled, then the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Now we start with tomorrow." Lila asked if she could come back to hear more about the flowers. "And you'll tell her more stories?" "I'll listen to her tell me more stories, and maybe if you're very quiet and very patient, she'll start telling them to you too." As Cassandra walked back to her car through the October evening, she found herself thinking about flowers and silence and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was about to learn something she'd never known she needed to know. Behind her, through the warm glow of Lou's windows, Ethan Cross sat alone with his cold coffee and his dog-eared book. But for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't really alone at all. And in a mansion on the North Shore, a 7-year-old girl with wild curls fell asleep, clutching a yellow dandelion, dreaming of voices that whispered like rain and mothers who might finally learn to listen. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made everything seem possible. Cassandra stood at her kitchen window, watching Lila pick at her breakfast, while autumn light painted golden squares across their marble countertops. The house felt different somehow, less like a museum, and more like a place where real people might actually live. "Are you excited about school today?" Cassandra asked, then immediately winced at how forced the question sounded. Too bright, too eager, exactly the kind of leading conversation Ethan had warned her about. Lila looked up from her cereal, those enormous brown eyes studying her mother with careful consideration. "Are you going to pick me up again?" The question caught Cassandra off guard. For months, Lila had ridden the bus home, disappearing into her room until dinner, while Cassandra worked late at the office. Yesterday's early pickup had been an anomaly driven by the parent-teacher conference. "Would you like me to?" Lila nodded, a small movement that sent warmth flooding through Cassandra's chest. Such a simple thing, a child wanting her mother to pick her up from school, but it felt like a miracle. "Then I will," Cassandra said softly. "Every day if you want." "What about your meetings?" The question revealed more than Lila probably intended. How many times had Cassandra explained her absence with talk of important meetings, urgent cases, clients who couldn't wait? How many times had her 7-year-old daughter learned to measure her own worth against the demands of Cassandra's career? "The meetings can wait," Cassandra said, and meant it. "You're more important." Lila's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, milk dripping back into the bowl as she processed this declaration. For a moment, Cassandra thought she might speak again, might ask one of those million questions that used to drive her to distraction. Instead, Lila just smiled, small and tentative but real. At Morrison & Associates, Cassandra's decision to leave early created ripples of confusion that spread through the office like circles on a pond. Margaret, her assistant, knocked on the office door 3 times with increasingly urgent reminders about depositions and client calls. "Cancel everything after 3, Cassandra said, not looking up from the brief she was reviewing. "And clear my calendar for the next few afternoons." "But Ms. Hale, the Patterson case can be handled by someone else, or it can wait." Margaret's silence spoke volumes. In 7 years of working together, Cassandra had never voluntarily cleared her schedule. She'd taken conference calls from hospital beds and written closing arguments on vacation. The idea of her prioritizing anything over work was revolutionary. "Is everything all right?" Margaret asked carefully. "Everything's fine. I'm just reprioritizing." But even as she said it, Cassandra wondered if that was true. Was everything fine? Or was she free-falling into a complete reorganization of everything she'd built her identity around? The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt oddly liberating. At 3:15, she pulled into the school parking lot to find Lila waiting by the front doors, small hands clutching her backpack straps. The sight of her daughter scanning the crowd of cars with anxious eyes made Cassandra's heart clench. How many times had Lila waited hopefully for a pickup that never came? "Hi, baby," Cassandra said, as Lila climbed into the back seat. "You came," Lila whispered, wonder evident in her voice. "I said I would." "You say lots of things." The observation was matter of fact, without accusation, which somehow made it worse. Cassandra adjusted the rearview mirror so she could see her daughter's face. "You're right. I do say lots of things. But this is different. This is a promise." "What's the difference?" The question hung in the air as Cassandra pulled out of the parking lot. What was the difference between her casual statements and actual promises, and had she stopped meaning what she said to her own child? "A promise is something you keep even when it's hard," Cassandra said finally. "Even when work is crazy, or clients are demanding, or everything else feels more urgent. A promise means the person you made it to matters more than all of that." Lila was quiet for several blocks, processing this distinction. Finally, "Did Daddy make promises too?" The punch to the gut was swift and brutal. James had made plenty of promises to love and cherish, to put family first, to be the husband and father they deserved. He'd broken every single one. "Yes," Cassandra said carefully. "Daddy made promises too. But he broke them." "Yes. Are you going to break yours?" The vulnerability in Lila's voice nearly undid her. This was why her daughter had stopped talking, not just from the trauma of divorce, but from the fear that words themselves couldn't be trusted. That promises were just pretty lies adults told to make children behave. "I'm going to try very hard not to," Cassandra said. "But if I do break a promise, I'll tell you why, and I'll make a new one. Deal?" In the mirror, she saw Lila consider this proposal with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice reviewing constitutional law. "Deal," Lila whispered. They drove in comfortable silence through the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, past houses where other families were living their own complicated stories. Cassandra found herself noticing things she'd never seen before. The way the afternoon light caught in the maple leaves, the small garden gates and flower boxes that spoke of people who had time to tend growing things. "Mom." Lila's voice was so soft, Cassandra almost missed it. "Can we go see Mr. Cross? I thought you might want to." Cassandra had been hoping for this request, had spent the morning wondering how to suggest it without pushing too hard. "He said something about flowers. He knows about all kinds of growing things. Not just flowers, but trees and vegetables and even weeds. He says weeds are just plants that nobody wanted, but they're still trying to live." The metaphor wasn't lost on Cassandra. How many people went through life feeling like weeds, unwanted, dismissed, fighting for space in a world that saw them as problems to be eliminated? How often had she made people feel that way, with her sharp words and impatient efficiency in con? Elementary after hours had a different energy than during the busy school day. The hallways were quieter, lit by late afternoon sun streaming through tall windows. A few teachers worked in their classrooms, and somewhere in the distance came the rhythmic sound of someone running a floor buffer. They found Ethan in the supply closet, where Cassandra had first discovered him, with Lila sorting through boxes of cleaning supplies with methodical precision. He'd changed back into his janitor's uniform, but somehow he made the simple blue shirt and dark pants look dignified rather than menial. "Right on time," he said, looking up as they appeared in the doorway. His smile was warm but reserved, and Cassandra could see him assessing the situation, mother and daughter together, the tentative truce that seemed to exist between them. "We brought something," Lila announced, producing a small potted plant from her backpack. "Mom said we could stop at the garden center." It was a African violet deep purple blooms nestled among velvety leaves. Cassandra had let Lila choose, watching her daughter examine dozens of options with the careful consideration of someone selecting a gift for a dear friend. "It's beautiful," Ethan said, accepting the pot with gentle hands. "What made you choose this one?" "It was sitting by itself," Lila explained. "All the other violets were together, but this one was alone. I thought maybe it was lonely." Ethan's eyes met Cassandra's over Lila's head, a flash of understanding passing between them. This child who'd spent months in self-imposed isolation had chosen to rescue another solitary soul. "Well, then we'll have to make sure it gets plenty of attention," Ethan said seriously. "African violets are very social plants. They do better when they're talked to." "Really?" "Absolutely. They like to hear about your day, your thoughts, your dreams. Some people think it's silly, but I've found that plants grow better when they feel included in the family." Lila's face lit up with the kind of joy Cassandra hadn't seen since before the divorce. "Can I talk to it now?" "Of course. But maybe we should find a better spot than a supply closet. Plants need good light to be good listeners." Ethan led them down the hallway to his small office, really just a converted storage room, with a desk, a chair, and a window that faced the playground. The space was sparse but clean, with a few personal touches that spoke of a man trying to make a temporary situation feel more permanent. A coffee mug with a chip in the handle, a small stack of books, a framed photograph turned face down on the desk. "This is perfect," Lila declared, settling cross-legged on the floor near the window. She placed the violet on the windowsill with reverent care, then leaned close to whisper to it. Cassandra couldn't make out the words, but she could see her daughter's lips moving in earnest conversation with the small plant. The sight was both heartbreaking and hopeful. This child, who'd been silent with humans for months, was pouring her heart out to a flower. "She's been like this since we left the garden center," Cassandra said quietly to Ethan, "talking to the plant like it's an old friend." "Maybe because it doesn't expect anything from her," Ethan replied, watching Lila with gentle attention. "Plants don't ask questions or try to fix things. They just listen." "Is that what I've been doing wrong? Asking too many questions?" "Not wrong exactly. Just human. We want to understand, to help, to make things better. But sometimes the wanting gets in the way of the being." Cassandra studied his profile as he watched her daughter. There was something peaceful about Ethan Cross, a stillness that seemed to come from having survived the worst thing imaginable and found a way to keep breathing. She wondered what that kind of acceptance felt like, what it cost to achieve that level of equanimity. "Tell me about your wife," she said impulsively, then immediately regretted the intrusion. "I'm sorry. That's too personal." "No, it's okay." Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. She was like sunlight, always finding the bright side of things, always making people feel welcome. She could talk to anyone, strangers in elevators, checkout clerks, the elderly woman next door, who most people avoided because she was lonely and talked too much. "She sounds wonderful." She was. And when the disease started taking her words away, it was like watching the sun set in slow motion. Day by day, a little less light in the world. Cassandra felt something tighten in her throat. "How did you stand it?" "I didn't at first. I fought it every step of the way, researching treatments, trying experimental therapies, refusing to accept that this brilliant, vibrant woman was disappearing. I thought if I could just find the right technique, the right approach, I could bring her back. But you couldn't. No. And the harder I fought, the more I missed what was still there. The way she'd smile when I walked into the room, even when she couldn't remember my name. The way she'd hum old songs even after she'd forgotten the words. The way she'd still reach for my hand when she was scared. Lila's soft voice drifted over from the window, a one-sided conversation about school and flowers and the changing colors of autumn leaves. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of it, the way she paused as if listening to responses only she could hear. "When did you stop fighting?" Cassandra asked. "The day she looked at me and said, 'I don't know who you are, but you have kind eyes.'" She was completely present in that moment, completely herself, even though she couldn't place me in her life. That's when I realized I'd been so focused on getting back what we'd lost that I was missing what we still had. The parallel to her situation with Lila was obvious, and Cassandra felt a familiar stab of recognition. How much time had she spent trying to get back the chattering, curious child Lila had been before the divorce? How much of her silent, thoughtful daughter had she missed in the process? So you learned to just be with her. I learned to follow her lead, instead of trying to lead her back to where I thought she should be. Some days that meant sitting in silence. Some days it meant playing the same song 50 times, because it made her happy. Some days it meant accepting that the woman I'd married was gone, but this new version of her deserved love too. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And also in some strange way the most beautiful. When you stop trying to control what's happening and just let yourself experience it, you discover things you never knew were there. Cassandra watched her daughter arrange imaginary tea parties with the violet, as a guest serving invisible refreshments on tiny leaf plates. There was something profoundly peaceful about Lila in this space, talking to a plant, while two adults who understood loss watched over her. "I don't know how to stop controlling things," Cassandra admitted. "Control is how I survived, how I built everything I have. And now I'm starting to think that maybe what I built isn't worth much if it means losing my daughter." Ethan turned to look at her directly, those storm-gray eyes serious and searching. "What are you afraid of, Cassandra?" The use of her first name was surprisingly intimate, and she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with maternal anxiety. When was the last time a man had looked at her like this, not as an adversary to be defeated, or a conquest to be won, but as a person worth understanding? "I'm afraid that if I'm not in control, everything will fall apart," she said honestly. "I'm afraid that if I show weakness, people will see me as less than. I'm afraid that if I slow down, I'll realize how empty my life really is." "And what are you afraid will happen with Lila?" The question cut deeper, hitting the fear she'd been avoiding for months. "I'm afraid she doesn't need me. I'm afraid she's better off without me trying to fix her. I'm afraid that when she does start talking again, she'll tell me she's happier in the silence." "And what if she did tell you that?" Cassandra's breath caught. It was the question she'd been running from since that first day in the supply closet, watching her daughter confide in a stranger what she wouldn't share with her own mother. "Then I guess I'd have to figure out how to love her enough to let her be who she is instead of who I need her to be." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Across the room, Lila was singing now, a soft, wordless melody that seemed to contain all the things she couldn't yet say in conversation. "That's a start," Ethan said gently. "Is it enough?" "It's more than most people manage." They sat in comfortable quiet for a while, watching Lila in her element. The late afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the small office, and somewhere in the building, a door closed with an echoing finality. "I should probably get her home," Cassandra said reluctantly. "Homework, dinner, the usual routine." "What if you changed the routine?" "How do you mean?" Ethan stood and walked to his desk, opening the bottom drawer to retrieve something wrapped in a faded blue towel. "I was thinking we could take a walk. There's something I'd like to show both of you." Lila looked up from her conversation, with the violet instantly alert. "Where are we going?" "To visit some friends of mine," Ethan said mysteriously. "But you'll have to bring your new friend along. I think she'd enjoy the trip." The friends turned out to be the school's garden, a small plot behind the building that Cassandra had never noticed. It was clearly Ethan's project, neat rows of late-season vegetables, herb borders that still held their fragrance despite the cooling weather, and along the far edge a riot of flowers that seemed to have been allowed to grow wild. "I started this in the spring," Ethan explained as they walked the narrow paths between plots. "The kids help sometimes during recess, but mostly it's just me and the plants talking things over." Lila was enchanted, setting her violet down carefully before kneeling to examine a patch of marigolds that glowed like small suns in the fading light. "They're so beautiful. Why did you plant them here?" "Well, marigolds are very social flowers," Ethan said, settling beside her in the dirt without concern for his uniform. "They like to be around other plants, and they help protect their neighbors from insects that might hurt them. Kind of like good friends. Like how you protect me from the loud things." Cassandra felt her heart skip. Loud things. Was that how Lila thought of her, as one of the loud things her daughter needed protection from? "What loud things?" Ethan asked gently. "Questions. And worried feelings. And the way grown-ups get upset when kids don't act the way they're supposed to." Lila spoke to the flowers rather than looking at either adult, her small fingers tracing the edges of bright petals. "Mom gets very loud feelings sometimes, even when she's not talking." The observation hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Her daughter had been reading her anxiety, her frustration, her desperate need for everything to be okay. All those months of trying to create calm environments and peaceful moments, and Lila had been absorbing Cassandra's inner turmoil like a sponge. "Your mom loves you very much," Ethan said carefully. "Sometimes when people love someone a lot, they worry a lot too, and worry can feel very loud even when it's quiet." "I know she loves me," Lila said simply, "but love feels different than worry. Love feels like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like when you water plants just enough. Not too much, not too little, just right." Cassandra knelt in the dirt beside her daughter, not caring about her expensive suit or the stains that would probably never come out. "Have I been watering you too much, sweetheart?" Lila considered this with her usual gravity. "Maybe a little, but I know you're learning. Mr. Cross is teaching you about flowers too." The simple forgiveness in her daughter's voice nearly undid Cassandra completely. Here was this wise, patient child offering grace to her imperfect mother, understanding that love and good intentions didn't always translate to good outcomes. "What else can you teach us?" Cassandra asked Ethan, surprised by how natural the word "us" felt. "Well," Ethan said, unwrapping the bundle he'd brought from his office, "I thought we might plant something together. Something that will bloom in the spring when Lila is in 3rd grade." Inside the towel were bulbs, dozens of them in different sizes and colors. Tulips, daffodils, crocuses, hyacinths. A rainbow of potential sleeping in small brown packages. "We plant them now in the cold?" Lila asked. "That's the magic of bulbs," Ethan explained. "They need the winter. They need the cold and the dark and the waiting time to become what they're meant to be." If you planted them in the spring, they'd never bloom. Cassandra watched her daughter process this information, seeing the wheels turn as Lila made connections that adults often missed. Sometimes you needed the difficult seasons to become who you were meant to be. Sometimes the waiting was as important as the blooming. They worked in companionable silence as the sun set, digging small holes and nestling bulbs into the earth with careful hands. Lila talked to each one as she planted it, whispering encouragements and promises to check on them through the winter. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, but Cassandra noticed how he slowed his pace to match Lila's, how he made space for her small hands in the shared work. "Will you show me how to plant things at home?" Lila asked, as they cleaned dirt from under their fingernails with water from the garden hose. "You want a garden at home?" Cassandra asked, trying to imagine where they might put one in their professionally landscaped yard. "Just a small one. Maybe in those big pots on the patio. Mr. Cross says plants like to have jobs, and I think it would be good to give some plants a job at our house." Cassandra found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the implications. Gardening required time attention, the kind of daily tending she'd never made space for in her carefully scheduled life. But something about the way Lila's face lit up at the possibility made the logistical challenges seem irrelevant. "We can start this weekend," she heard herself saying. "We'll go to the garden center and pick out some pots and some plants that won't mind living on a patio." "Really? Really? It's a promise." As they walked back toward the school building, Lila carrying her violet with renewed purpose, Cassandra felt something shifting inside her chest. The constant anxiety that had been her companion for months seemed to have loosened its grip, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, simple contentment. "Thank you," she said quietly to Ethan as they reached the parking lot. "For what?" "For showing her that growing things take time. For teaching me that some questions don't need immediate answers." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "For helping me remember that love doesn't always look like fixing." Ethan's smile was soft in the gathering darkness. "Tomorrow is Saturday. No school." "Are you working weekends now too?" "No, but I thought—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I thought maybe we could visit the Botanical Conservatory downtown. They have a children's program about tropical plants. If you're interested." The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and risk. This would be stepping outside the safe boundaries of school grounds and educational purposes into something that looked suspiciously like spending time together by choice. "I'd like that," Cassandra said, before she could overthink it. "We'd like that. Wouldn't we, Lila? Can we bring the violet?" "I think the violet would love an adventure," Ethan said seriously. As they separated to their respective cars, Cassandra found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt since childhood. Not the controlled anticipation of a successful closing argument or a won case, but the simple pleasure of spending time with people who made her feel less alone in the world. "Mom!" Lila's voice was sleepy as they drove through the darkening neighborhood. "Yes, baby." "I'm glad you came to school early yesterday." "Me too." "Are you going to keep coming early?" Cassandra thought about her calendar packed with meetings and depositions and client demands that had seemed so crucial just days ago. Then she thought about her daughter's face when she'd spotted Cassandra's car in the pickup line, the wonder in her voice when she'd whispered, "You came." "Yes," Cassandra said firmly. "I'm going to keep coming early." In the rearview mirror, she watched Lila settle back against her car seat, the violet cradled protectively in her small arms. For the first time in months, her daughter looked peaceful, not the withdrawn quiet of depression, but the satisfied calm of someone who felt heard and understood. And for the first time since her divorce, Cassandra found herself looking forward to tomorrow, instead of just trying to survive today. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made Chicago's autumn feel like a gift. Cassandra woke before her alarm, something that hadn't happened in years, and found herself actually looking forward to the day ahead instead of dreading the endless list of tasks that usually awaited her weekends. She found Lila already awake in her room, sitting by the window, with the African violet on her lap, conducting what appeared to be a very serious conversation about the weather and the state of the world. The sight made Cassandra's heart squeeze with an emotion she couldn't quite name, part joy, part regret, for all the mornings she'd missed rushing off to work. "Good morning, sweetheart," Cassandra said softly from the doorway. "Mom?" Lila's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Violet says she's excited about today. She's never been to a conservatory before." Cassandra bit back the automatic correction about plants not being able to talk. Yesterday's lessons about listening without fixing were still fresh in her mind. "Well, then we'll have to make sure she has a wonderful first adventure. What should we bring for her? Maybe a little water bottle in case she gets thirsty from all the traveling." "That's very thoughtful. We can make her a special travel kit." They spent the next hour preparing for their expedition with the kind of elaborate care usually reserved for cross-country moves. Lila packed a small bag with water plant food and what she called emergency soil in case Violet felt homesick. Cassandra found herself caught up in her daughter's methodical preparations, remembering her own childhood rituals around special outings. "Are you nervous about seeing Mr. Cross outside of school?" Cassandra asked as they loaded into the car. Lila considered this question with her usual gravity. "A little. What if he's different when he's not at work? What if we don't know how to talk to each other in a new place?" The insight surprised Cassandra. At 7, Lila already understood that relationships could be contextual, that people might present differently in different environments. It was the kind of emotional intelligence that Cassandra herself was still learning. "Then we'll figure it out together," Cassandra said. "Sometimes the best conversations happen when you're doing something new." They met Ethan at the entrance to the Garfield Park Conservatory, and Cassandra felt an unexpected flutter of nerves as she spotted him waiting by the ornate glass doors. He'd traded his janitor's uniform for dark jeans and a navy sweater that brought out his eyes, and the transformation was more dramatic than she'd expected. Without the institutional clothing, he looked younger, more approachable, and undeniably attractive in a way that made her suddenly self-conscious about her own carefully chosen outfit, jeans and a soft green cashmere sweater that Lila had pronounced nature colors. "You brought the whole family," Ethan said, smiling, as he noticed the Violet's travel bag. "Violet insisted on coming," Lila explained seriously. "She said she wanted to meet her cousins." "Well, she's going to have quite a reunion then. There are about 3,000 plants inside." The conservatory was a cathedral of glass and green soaring spaces filled with the humid warmth of tropical climates and the intoxicating scent of growing things. Lila stood transfixed in the entrance hall, Violet clutched protectively in her arms, eyes wide with wonder at the jungle that stretched out before them. "It's like being inside a terrarium," she whispered. "Exactly like that." Ethan agreed. "Come on, let me show you some of my favorites." He led them through pathways that wound between towering palms and flowering vines, past pools where lily pads floated like green plates, and water trickled musically over stones. His knowledge was encyclopedic, but never condescending. He spoke to Lila as an equal, sharing Latin names and growing habits with the same enthusiasm he might discuss favorite books or movies. "This is a bird of paradise," he said, stopping beside a plant with dramatic orange and blue blooms that did indeed look like exotic birds in flight. "They're originally from South Africa, but they've adapted to live in greenhouses all over the world." "Like immigrants," Lila said thoughtfully. Exactly like immigrants. They had to learn to thrive in new soil, new climates, new communities, but they brought their beauty with them. Cassandra watched her daughter absorb this lesson, seeing connections that went far beyond botany. How many people were like these transplanted flowers, carrying their essential selves into new environments, learning to bloom in unfamiliar ground? They spent 2 hours wandering through different climate zones, from the misty fern room to the blazing desert house where cacti bloomed in impossible shades of pink and yellow. Lila chattered constantly, asking questions and making observations that revealed her quick mind and generous heart. More importantly, she seemed to have forgotten to be self-conscious about speaking, her words flowing as naturally as water. "Look how the desert plants save water in their stems," she told Violet, holding the small pot up to examine a barrel cactus. "They're very smart about not wasting things." "Some people are like that too," Ethan said quietly to Cassandra as they watched Lila conduct her botanical lecture. "They learn to store up the good things for when times get hard." "Is that what you did after Sarah?" The question slipped out before Cassandra could stop it, too personal for their tentative friendship. But Ethan didn't seem offended. "I tried to," he said. "But I think I stored up the wrong things. The grief, the guilt, the sense of failure. I forgot to save any of the joy. And now—" He was quiet for a long moment, watching Lila explain photosynthesis to her Violet with the patience of a natural teacher. "Now I'm remembering that joy doesn't disappear just because you stop paying attention to it. It just waits for you to notice it again." Something in his voice made Cassandra look at him more closely. There was a lightness in his expression that she hadn't seen before, a sense of possibility that transformed his features from merely handsome to genuinely compelling. "The children's program starts in 10 minutes, he said, checking his watch. "Should we find the classroom?" The program was led by an enthusiastic graduate student named Maria, who had Lila and a dozen other children planting seeds in small pots while she told stories about rainforest adventures and plant explorers. Cassandra found herself sitting on a tiny plastic chair beside Ethan, their knees almost touching in the cramped space designed for children. "This feels very domestic," Cassandra murmured, watching Lila carefully measure potting soil with the concentration of a scientist. "Does that bother you?" "It should. I'm not a domestic person. I don't do crafts or bake cookies or know the names of cartoon characters. I've always been the career mom, the one who shows up to school events in a suit and leaves early for conference calls. And now I'm sitting in a children's gardening class on a Saturday morning, and I can't remember the last time I felt this content." Ethan's smile was warm and understanding. Sometimes the life we think we want isn't the life that actually makes us happy. "Is that what happened to you before Sarah got sick?" "In some ways. I was so focused on being successful, on building a reputation, on helping other people fix their communication problems, that I forgot to pay attention to my own life. Ironic, considering my profession." "Do you miss it, the work?" "I miss the feeling of helping people. I miss the moment when someone finds their voice after months or years of struggle. But I don't miss the pressure, the constant need to have answers, the weight of everyone else's expectations." Lila looked up from her seed planting, with dirt-smudged cheeks and a radiant smile. "Mom, look, I planted zinnia seeds. Maria says they'll bloom in different colors, but we won't know what colors until they grow up." "That's the best kind of surprise," Cassandra said, leaning down to examine her daughter's handiwork. "Something beautiful that you have to wait for." "Like me talking again," Lila said matter-of-factly. Nobody knew what it would sound like or when it would happen, but it did. The simple profundity of her statement left both adults speechless for a moment. Here was this wise child who understood instinctively what they were all still learning, that healing couldn't be rushed, that growth happened in its own time, that the most important transformations often occurred in darkness and silence. After the program ended, they found themselves reluctant to leave the conservatory's warm embrace. The October afternoon had turned gray and chilly, threatening rain, and the thought of returning to their separate lives felt premature. "There's a cafe in the visitor center," Ethan suggested. "They make excellent hot chocolate." "Can Violet come too?" Lila asked. "I think Violet would enjoy a warm drink after all this excitement." The cafe was busy with other families ending their conservatory visits, the air rich with the scent of coffee and baked goods. They found a table by the window where they could watch the first drops of rain begin to speckle the glass, and Lila carefully arranged Violet's pot so the plant could see outside. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Cassandra said to Ethan once Lila was absorbed in adding sugar to her hot chocolate. "About following instead of leading. I'm not sure I know how to do that." "What do you mean?" "I've spent my whole adult life being in charge, making decisions, solving problems, directing outcomes. Even in my marriage, I was always the one pushing for what came next: bigger house, better schools, more successful careers. I don't know how to just be. Maybe start small. What would happen if you let Lila choose what you did this afternoon?" Cassandra looked at her daughter, who was now conducting a whispered conference with Violet about the merits of marshmallows versus whipped cream. "Lila, what would you like to do after we finish our drinks?" Lila's eyes widened with surprise at being consulted. "Really, I can choose. Really?" "Well..." Lila considered her options with characteristic seriousness. "I think Violet would like to see where we live. She's never been to our house, and she might want to meet the other plants on the patio." "That sounds perfect. Would Mr. Cross like to come see our house too?" Cassandra's heart skipped as she realized what she'd just done: invited a man she barely knew to her home, to the private space she'd guarded so carefully since her divorce. But looking at Ethan's gentle smile and Lila's hopeful expression, the invitation felt natural rather than reckless. "I'd like that very much," Ethan said, "but only if you're sure." "I'm sure," Cassandra said, and meant it. The drive to Cassandra's North Shore home was filled with Lila's commentary on the changing neighborhoods, her observations about architecture and landscaping, delivered with the authority of someone who'd clearly been paying attention to the world around her. Ethan followed in his own car, an older Honda that looked practical rather than impressive, and Cassandra found herself wondering what he'd think of her house with its manicured perfection and obvious expense. "This is where we live," Lila announced as they pulled into the circular driveway. "It's very big, but it echoes a lot." Echoes. Another one of her daughter's painfully accurate observations. The house did echo with emptiness, with the absence of warmth that money couldn't buy. "It's beautiful," Ethan said diplomatically as they climbed the front steps. "It's cold," Lila corrected matter-of-factly. "But the patio is nice. That's where the plants live." Indeed, the back patio was the one part of the house that felt alive. Cassandra's housekeeper had maintained the large planters that lined the space, keeping them filled with seasonal flowers and greenery that added color and life to the formal outdoor furniture. "Oh, Violet's going to love meeting everyone," Lila said, immediately setting her pot among the other plants and beginning introductions. "These are the mums, and this is the ornamental kale, and over here are the pansies. They've been waiting for a new friend." Cassandra watched her daughter orchestrate this botanical social hour, while Ethan examined the existing plants with a professional eye. The sight of them together in her space, this man and child, who'd somehow become important to her in the space of just a few days, made something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. "You have good instincts," Ethan said, joining her at the edge of the patio. These are all plants that can handle transitional weather. They'll last well into winter if they're cared for properly. I can't take credit. I pay someone to maintain them. But you chose to have them. That's something. I chose to have pretty things that would look good for entertaining clients. I never thought about them as living beings that needed care and attention. And now, Cassandra watched Lila arranging the pots so that the smaller plants could see better, her small hands gentle and sure as she adjusted their positions. Now I think I'd like to learn to take care of them myself, to understand what they need. It's not as complicated as people make it sound. Plants are very honest. They show you when they're happy or stressed or need something different. You just have to pay attention. Like children. Like children. They stood in comfortable silence watching Lila's elaborate plant community take shape. The rain had started in earnest, now drumming against the covered patio roof and creating a cozy sense of shelter. Cassandra felt an unexpected urge to make this moment last, to find a reason for Ethan to stay longer. "Are you hungry?" she asked impulsively. "I could make dinner. Nothing fancy, just—" She trailed off, realizing she had no idea what was actually in her kitchen. When was the last time she'd cooked a meal from scratch instead of ordering takeout or heating something prepared? "I'd like that," Ethan said gently. "But maybe we could cook together, all three of us." "I should warn you, my culinary skills are limited to toast and coffee." "Then this will be an adventure for everyone." What followed was the kind of domestic chaos Cassandra had never experienced in her own kitchen. They rummaged through her barely used pantry and refrigerator, finding ingredients for what Ethan diplomatically called improvised pasta, a combination of whatever vegetables they could find, olive oil, garlic, and hope. Lila appointed herself head vegetable washer, standing on a step stool at the sink, while she carefully cleaned mushrooms and cherry tomatoes under Ethan's patient guidance. Cassandra found herself relegated to salad duty, a task she approached with the same intense focus she brought to legal briefs. "Cooking doesn't have to be perfect," Ethan said gently, watching her measure lettuce leaves with mathematical precision. "It's about nourishment, not presentation." "I don't know how to do things imperfectly," Cassandra admitted. "It's not in my nature. Maybe that's something worth learning." "Why?" "Because perfect doesn't leave room for surprise, or growth, or the kind of beautiful accidents that make life interesting." As if to prove his point, Lila knocked over the salt shaker while reaching for a towel, sending white crystals across the counter in a pattern that looked like snow. Instead of the frustrated cleanup Cassandra expected, her daughter started laughing. "Look, it's winter in the kitchen." Lila giggled, drawing swirls in the spilled salt with her finger. Ethan joined her laughter, and after a moment of internal struggle, so did Cassandra. It was such a small thing, spilled salt easily cleaned, but somehow it felt revolutionary. When was the last time she'd laughed at a mess, instead of immediately fixing it? "Should we make salt angels?" Lila asked hopefully. "Salt angels," Cassandra repeated. "Like snow angels, but smaller." And somehow, impossibly, Cassandra found herself helping her daughter create tiny angel shapes in spilled salt, while their dinner simmered on the stove and rain continued to fall against the kitchen windows. It was chaotic and messy and completely unproductive, and it felt like the most important thing she'd done in years. "This is nice," Lila said as they finally sat down to eat their improvised meal. "It feels like a real family." The words hung in the air, innocent, but loaded with meaning. Cassandra felt her breath catch, unsure how to respond to such a direct observation. What did feel like a real family? This three people sharing a simple meal they'd made together, talking about plants and stories and the sound of rain. What makes a family feel real? Ethan asked gently. Lila considered the question while twirling pasta around her fork. When people listen to each other, when they laugh about mistakes instead of getting upset, when they take care of plants together. Those are very good rules for families, Ethan said seriously. Are you going to be part of our family? Lila asked with the devastating directness that only children could manage. Cassandra felt her heart stop. This was the question she'd been avoiding, the conversation that felt too complicated and too soon and too important to rush. But here was her daughter, as always, cutting straight to the heart of things. Lila, Cassandra began, but Ethan held up a gentle hand. That's a very big question, he said to Lila. And very important questions deserve careful answers. What I can tell you is that I care about you and your mom very much, and I'd like to keep spending time with you if that's okay. Like friends, maybe even like family friends. Lila seemed satisfied with this distinction. Good, because Violet likes it here, and she gets nervous about changes. After dinner, they migrated back to the patio where the rain had stopped, and evening light was painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Lila settled on the floor next to her plant collection, resuming her earlier conversations, while Cassandra and Ethan found themselves sitting together on the outdoor sofa, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean and woody that suited him perfectly. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For handling her question so well. I was completely unprepared for that level of directness. Kids don't do subtext. It's one of the things I love about working with them. They ask for what they need, instead of expecting you to guess. Is that what adults do wrong, expect people to guess? Sometimes, we get so caught up in protecting ourselves that we forget to be clear about what we actually want. Cassandra felt the weight of his words, the challenge implicit in them. What did she want? 3 days ago, she would have said she wanted her old life back, her successful daughter, her peaceful home, her uncomplicated routine. Now, watching Lila arrange her plants like a small United Nations assembly, while this gentle man sat beside her, she wasn't sure she wanted any of those things anymore. What do you want? She asked him. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching Lila's elaborate botanical diplomacy session. I want to remember what it feels like to be part of something. I want to wake up in the morning and have a reason to get out of bed that goes beyond just surviving another day. And do you have that reason now? He turned to look at her directly, those storm-gray eyes serious and searching. I'm starting to. The confession hung between them, intimate and frightening, and full of possibility. Cassandra felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of defenses she'd maintained for so long, she'd forgotten they were there. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Do what? This. Whatever this is, I don't know how to care about someone without trying to control the outcome. I don't know how to let people in without expecting them to leave. Maybe we figure it out together. Is that what you want? To figure it out together? Before he could answer, Lila's voice cut through the evening air with urgent excitement. Mom, Mr. Cross, come look, something's happening. They hurried over to find Lila kneeling beside a large planter, pointing at something hidden among the foliage. Following her gaze, Cassandra saw it, a single bulb pushing through the soil, a green shoot no bigger than her pinky finger, but unmistakably alive and growing. But we just planted the bulbs yesterday, Cassandra said, confused. This isn't from yesterday, Ethan said, crouching down to examine the emergence more closely. This is something that was planted earlier, maybe in the spring. It's been waiting underground all this time. Waiting for what? For the right conditions, the right temperature, the right amount of moisture, the right moment to begin. Lila reached out to touch the tiny green shoot with reverent fingers. It's like it was sleeping and just woke up. Exactly like that, Ethan said softly. As they knelt together around this small miracle of timing and patience, Cassandra felt something profound shift inside her understanding. Growth wasn't always visible. Sometimes the most important changes happened in darkness and silence in spaces where no one could see or measure or judge the progress. Sometimes things that looked dormant were actually gathering strength for exactly the right moment to emerge. "What kind of flower will it be?" Lila asked. "We'll have to wait and see," Ethan said. "Some surprises are worth waiting for." And as the three of them sat together in the gathering dusk, watching over this small green promise of spring, Cassandra found herself believing for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, the most beautiful things really did come to those who learned to wait and trust and tend the invisible seeds of possibility with patient hands and open hearts. The evening ended with reluctant goodbyes and promises to see each other again soon. But as Cassandra tucked Lila into bed later that night, she found herself thinking about green shoots and perfect timing and the courage it took to emerge from the safe darkness into the uncertain light. "Mom." Lila's sleepy voice drifted up from her pillow, where Violet sat, in place of honor among the stuffed animals. "Yes, sweetheart. I think today was a good day." "I think so too." "Are we going to have more days like this?" Cassandra thought about promises and hope and the delicate green shoot that had chosen today of all days to begin its journey toward blooming. "I hope so, baby. I really hope so." The week that followed their evening together passed in a blur of small revelations and careful progress. Cassandra found herself leaving the office earlier each day, drawn home by the promise of checking on their mysterious green shoot and the conversations that bloomed around Lila's growing plant collection. Their evening routines had evolved into something neither of them had planned, but both treasured homework at the kitchen table while dinner simmered updates on each plant's daily progress and stories that meandered through topics both serious and silly. Wednesday evening brought the first real test of their new dynamic, when Lila's homework proved more challenging than usual. "I don't understand this math problem," Lila said, her voice edged with the kind of frustration that used to trigger Cassandra's immediate intervention. "It doesn't make sense." Cassandra's instinct was to lean over, take the pencil, and solve the problem herself, the efficient approach that had served her well in every other area of life. Instead, she forced herself to sit back and consider what Ethan would do in this moment. "What part doesn't make sense?" she asked gently. "All of it. The numbers are too big, and the words are confusing, and I hate it." Lila's voice was rising toward the edge of tears, a familiar precipice that had often led to meltdowns in recent months. "Okay," Cassandra said, suppressing every instinct to fix, direct, and solve. "Can you tell me what the problem is asking you to do?" "It's about gardens," Lila said with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Patterson has 24 flowers and she wants to plant them in rows with the same number in each row. We have to figure out all the different ways she could do it." Cassandra felt a spark of recognition. "That sounds like something we could figure out with actual flowers. Should we go check on your collection?" The suggestion transformed Lila's frustrated energy into curious engagement. They gathered 24 cherry tomatoes from the refrigerator, the closest thing to flowers available, and spread them across the kitchen table like a mathematical garden. "So, we need to make rows with the same number in each row," Cassandra said, channeling every patience she'd learned from watching Ethan with plants and children. "What's the smallest number of rows we could make?" "1 row," Lila suggested tentatively. "Show me what that would look like." Lila arranged all 24 tomatoes in a long line across the table. But that's a very long row. Mrs. Patterson might not have enough space. Good thinking. What about 2 rows? They worked through the possibilities together, creating different arrangements while discussing the merits of each configuration. Wide gardens versus narrow ones. The aesthetics of different patterns. The practical considerations of watering and weeding. Mathematics became storytelling, abstract concepts transformed into tangible decisions about imaginary landscapes. "Look," Lila said, with growing excitement as she arranged the tomatoes into 4 rows of 6. "This one looks like a real garden, like something Mr. Cross would plant." "Why does it remind you of Mr. Cross?" "Because it's balanced. Not too spread out, not too crowded, just right for all the plants to be happy." The observation revealed more than mathematical understanding. It showed Lila's growing awareness of harmony, of the delicate balance required for things to thrive. Cassandra felt a rush of pride that had nothing to do with correct answers and everything to do with her daughter's developing wisdom. "Should we try 3 rows?" Cassandra suggested. 3 rows of 8. Lila began rearranging with practiced efficiency. "This looks different. More like soldiers marching than flowers growing." "Which do you think Mrs. Patterson would prefer?" "The flower garden. Definitely. Teachers like things that help kids learn, and you can learn more from gardens than from soldiers." By the time they'd explored all possible arrangements, Lila's homework was complete, and Cassandra had gained new insight into her daughter's mind. The child who'd been silent for months had strong opinions about beauty balance and the way mathematics could reflect the natural world. More importantly, she'd solved her problems through exploration rather than frustration, with support rather than interference. "Mom," Lila said as they cleaned up their tomato garden, "this was more fun than regular homework." "What made it more fun?" "You didn't tell me the answers. You helped me find them myself." The distinction hit Cassandra with the force of revelation. How many times had she rushed to provide solutions instead of supporting discovery? How many opportunities for learning had she circumvented in the name of efficiency? "I'm still learning how to help without taking over," Cassandra admitted. "That's okay. Learning takes practice. That's what Mr. Cross says about everything plants talking being friends. Everything gets easier with practice." Thursday brought an unexpected visitor to Cassandra's office in the form of Margaret's hesitant knock and worried expression. "There's someone here to see you," Margaret said carefully. "He says he's from Lila's school." Cassandra's heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. Accidents, emergencies, the kind of calls that every parent dreaded. But when she looked up, she saw Ethan standing in her office doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I'm sorry to bother you at work," he said, accepting her gesture to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "But something's happened at school, and I thought you should know." "Is Lila okay?" "She's fine. More than fine, actually. But there's been a situation with the school board." Cassandra felt her professional instincts sharpen the familiar shift into problem-solving mode that had served her well in countless crises. "What kind of situation?" "Apparently, some parents have raised concerns about my interactions with students. They've asked questions about my qualifications, my background check, whether it's appropriate for a janitor to be spending time with children outside of normal custodial duties." The words hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Of course, this would happen. Of course, someone would find a way to complicate the one good thing that had emerged from months of struggle and silence. What specifically are they concerned about? The usual fears: stranger danger, inappropriate relationships, the assumption that someone working as a janitor couldn't possibly have legitimate reasons for caring about children's well-being. Cassandra could hear the hurt beneath his controlled tone, the way accusations of impropriety would wound someone who'd dedicated his career to helping others. Who complained? I don't know. Principal Morrison wouldn't tell me. But she did say the board wants to meet with me tomorrow afternoon to discuss what they're calling appropriate boundaries between staff and students. And you came to tell me because... Ethan looked directly at her, his storm gray eyes serious and steady. Because this affects Lila too. If they decide to restrict my interactions with students, she'll lose something important. And I thought, and I hoped, that maybe you'd be willing to speak on my behalf. The request hung between them heavy with implications. Supporting Ethan would mean taking a public stand, using her professional reputation to defend a relationship that many people might not understand. It would mean making herself vulnerable to the same kind of scrutiny and judgment that he was facing. What exactly would you need me to say? The truth. That my interactions with Lila have been appropriate and beneficial. That I've helped her in ways that professional therapists couldn't. That sometimes healing comes from unexpected places. Cassandra studied his face, looking for any sign of manipulation or self-interest. Instead, she saw genuine concern for her daughter's welfare and a quiet dignity in the face of unfair accusations. I'll be there, she said without hesitation, and I'll bring documentation of Lila's progress testimony about your impact on her development, whatever they need to see that you're helping, not harming. Relief flooded Ethan's features. Thank you. I know this complicates things for you professionally. Let me worry about my professional complications. Right now, I'm more concerned about making sure they understand what you've given us. That evening, Cassandra found herself in the unfamiliar position of preparing for a battle that wasn't about winning or losing, but about protecting something precious and fragile. She called Dr. Williams, Lila's previous therapist, and requested documentation of her daughter's struggles. She compiled notes about Lila's progress since meeting Ethan, creating a timeline that showed dramatic improvement in communication, emotional regulation, and social engagement. What are you working on? Lila asked, appearing in the doorway of Cassandra's home office with Violet in her arms. Some people at your school have questions about Mr. Cross, Cassandra said carefully. They want to make sure he's following all the rules about how teachers and staff should interact with students. Lila's expression grew serious. Are they trying to make him stop talking to kids? They might be. That's not fair. He helps kids. He helped me find my voice again. I know, sweetheart. That's why I'm putting together information to show them how much he's helped you. Can I help? Cassandra looked at her daughter, 7 years old, clutching a plant like a talisman, offering to defend the man who'd given her back her words. What would you want to tell them? That Mr. Cross listens, that he doesn't try to fix people or make them talk before they're ready. That he knows about growing things and waiting and being patient. That he's not scary even though he's big. That he makes school feel safer. Those are very good things to tell them. Would you be brave enough to say those things to the grown-ups who make decisions about school? Lila considered this with her usual gravity. If it would help Mr. Cross, yes, because that's what friends do. They help each other when things get hard. The school board meeting was held in the district's administrative offices, a sterile conference room that felt designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Cassandra arrived in her most professional suit armor for a different kind of battle, carrying a briefcase full of documentation and righteous anger, carefully controlled into persuasive argument. Principal Morrison was there, along with 3 board members and the district's legal counsel. Ethan sat at one end of the long table, looking composed but tense, wearing the same navy sweater he'd worn to the conservatory, but somehow diminished by the institutional setting. Ms. Hale, Principal Morrison said, with surprised recognition. I wasn't expecting to see you here, Mr. Cross asked me to speak on his behalf. Cassandra replied smoothly, taking a seat beside him. As a parent whose child has benefited significantly from his presence at Lincoln Elementary. Board member Patricia Walsh, a woman Cassandra recognized from various school fundraising events, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Ms. Hale, while we appreciate your perspective as a parent, our concerns center on appropriate professional boundaries and the safety protocols that protect our students. I understand your concerns, Cassandra replied, opening her briefcase with practiced efficiency, which is why I've brought documentation that speaks directly to those issues. She spent the next 20 minutes presenting her case with the same methodical precision she brought to courtroom arguments. Lila's therapy records showing months of failed progress. The timeline of improvement that coincided exactly with Ethan's arrival at the school. Dr. Williams's professional assessment that her daughter's breakthrough represented the kind of therapeutic success that typically took years to achieve. Mr. Cross didn't cross any boundaries, Cassandra concluded. He created space for my daughter to find her own way back to communication. His background as a speech therapist, combined with his natural empathy and patience, made him uniquely qualified to help a child who'd been failed by more traditional approaches. But he's working as a janitor, board member David Chen pointed out. If he has professional qualifications, why isn't he using them in an official capacity? Cassandra glanced at Ethan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They'd discussed this question the night before, weighing the privacy of his grief against the need for transparency. Mr. Cross experienced a significant personal loss that led him to step away from clinical practice, Cassandra said carefully. Sometimes healing requires finding different ways to serve others. His current role allowed him to help children without the formal pressures and expectations that might have been overwhelming during his recovery. And you believe his interactions with your daughter have been appropriate? Asked Susan Martinez, the third board member. I believe his interactions with my daughter have been life-changing. She went from 8 months of silence to speaking, laughing, and engaging with the world again. As a mother, and as an attorney, I can tell you that the evidence of benefit far outweighs any theoretical concerns about unconventional therapeutic relationships. Board member Walsh shuffled through papers with obvious discomfort. The complaints we received suggested that Mr. Cross was developing inappropriate attachments to certain students, spending excessive time with them outside of normal custodial duties. Then your complainants have failed to understand the difference between inappropriate attachment and appropriate care, Cassandra replied, allowing steel to enter her voice. Mr. Cross treated my daughter with the same respect and attention he would give any child in his care. His interactions were always in public spaces, always focused on her emotional and educational development, and always conducted with the kind of professional boundaries you'd expect from any qualified educator. But he's not an educator in an official capacity, Chen insisted. Neither are the lunch ladies who comfort crying children, or the secretaries who notice when kids seem upset, or the bus drivers who make sure everyone gets home safely. Schools work because caring adults look out for children in whatever capacity they serve. Mr. Cross simply brought professional expertise to that natural human impulse to nurture and protect. Principal Morrison, who'd been quiet through most of the presentation, finally spoke up. Ms. Hale raises valid points. I've observed Mr. Cross's interactions with students throughout his tenure here, and I've never seen anything that raised concerns about appropriate boundaries. If anything, his presence has had a calming effect on our more anxious students. The question isn't whether Mr. Cross is a good person, Walsh said, with obvious frustration. The question is whether we can expose the district to liability by allowing informal therapeutic relationships to develop between staff and students. Cassandra felt her professional instincts fully engage. This wasn't about child safety. This was about institutional fear, the kind of risk-averse thinking that prioritized legal protection over student welfare. "Mrs. Walsh," she said with quiet authority, "I've spent 7 years representing this district in various legal matters. I'm intimately familiar with your liability concerns, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that restricting beneficial relationships between caring adults and struggling children exposes you to far greater risk than allowing those relationships to continue under appropriate supervision." "How do you figure that?" "Because children who don't receive appropriate support often develop more serious problems that require more expensive interventions. Emergency Psychiatric holds residential treatment special education services, all of which cost significantly more than allowing a qualified professional to provide informal support within the existing school structure." She opened another folder revealing cost analyses and statistical comparisons that painted a stark picture of the financial impact of untreated childhood trauma and communication disorders. "More importantly," Cassandra continued, "you have a child who was failing to thrive in your educational environment, who is now succeeding. Removing the support system that enabled that success could be viewed as educational negligence, particularly given Mr. Cross's professional qualifications and the documented benefits of his intervention." The room fell silent as the board members absorbed the implications of her argument. Cassandra could see them calculating risks and benefits, weighing their fears against the evidence she'd presented. "What do you propose?" Martinez asked finally. "I propose that you formalize Mr. Cross's role, create a position that acknowledges his therapeutic background while maintaining his current accessibility to students. Assistant Counselor, Educational Support Specialist. Whatever title allows him to continue providing the kind of help that turns struggling children into thriving ones." "And if we choose not to make those accommodations?" Walsh asked. Cassandra's smile was sharp and professional. "Then I'll be forced to consider whether my daughter's educational needs are being met in this district, along with any other parents whose children have benefited from Mr. Cross's support." The implicit threat hung in the air, not just the loss of one student, but the potential exodus of families who valued innovative approaches to child development. In a district that prided itself on academic excellence and community support, the message was clear. Protecting bureaucratic comfort zones wasn't worth sacrificing student success. "We'll need time to consider our options," Chen said diplomatically. "Of course. But I trust you'll move quickly. My daughter is expecting to see Mr. Cross on Monday, and disappointing children who've already experienced too much loss isn't something I'd recommend." As the meeting dispersed, Ethan waited for Cassandra in the parking lot, his expression unreadable in the fading afternoon light. "That was impressive," he said, as they reached their cars. "You argued like Lila's future depended on it." "It does, and so does yours. Mine." Cassandra turned to face him, fully surprised by her own emotional investment in his answer. "I meant what I said in there. About formalizing your role, about creating space for you to use your gifts in ways that help children. You're too valuable to waste on floor waxing and supply closets. And what if they decide not to accommodate? What if they choose the safe option and restrict my interactions with students?" The possibility sent a chill through Cassandra that had nothing to do with the October air. Losing Ethan's presence at school would mean losing the foundation of Lila's recovery. But more than that, it would mean losing the person who'd taught them both how to listen, how to wait, how to tend the invisible seeds of possibility with patient hands. "Then we'll figure out another way," she said firmly, "because Lila needs you, and..." She paused, gathering courage for a truth that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "And I think I need you too." The confession hung between them, more intimate than any physical touch, more vulnerable than any legal argument she'd ever made. Ethan's expression softened the careful distance he maintained, dissolving into something warmer and more immediate. "Cassandra," he said quietly, and her name in his voice sounded like a promise. "I know it's complicated. I know we've only known each other for a week, and that my life is messy, and that getting involved with me and Lila means signing up for things you never bargained for. And what if I want to sign up for those things?" The question stopped her breath. "Do you?" Instead of answering immediately, Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to smell his cologne and the faint scent of the hand soap from the school's supply closets. "I've spent 2 years trying to figure out how to live without hope," he said quietly. "And then I met a little girl who talks to flowers and her mother who fights dragons in conference rooms. And suddenly I remember what it feels like to want tomorrow to come." "Ethan, I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know there are a dozen reasons why getting involved with each other is probably a terrible idea. But I also know that for the first time since Sarah died, I wake up in the morning with a reason to get out of bed." Cassandra felt something break open in her chest, a loosening of defenses she'd maintained for so long, she'd forgotten they were there. This man who understood loss and patience and the courage it took to tend growing things was offering her something she'd never expected to find, again, partnership. Not the adversarial dance she'd known with James, but true collaboration in the work of building a life worth living. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait to hear what the school board decides. And regardless of what they choose, we figure out how to keep moving forward together. All three of us, plus Violet, of course. I wouldn't want to leave her out of the family planning." The word family sent warmth flooding through Cassandra's chest. Not the broken fragments of what she'd lost, but something new and intentional, and built on the solid foundation of understanding rather than assumption. "Lila will be so relieved," she said. "She's been worried about you." "And what about her mother? Has she been worried too?" Cassandra smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Her mother has been terrified, but also hopeful, which is a new feeling for her." "Good. Hope is worth being terrified for." As they stood together in the empty parking lot, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Cassandra felt the profound shift that comes when you realize your life is about to change in ways you never imagined. Not the careful, controlled changes she'd always planned, but the kind of organic growth that happens when you stop trying to direct every outcome and start trusting the process of becoming. Monday morning brought the call Cassandra had been hoping for. Principal Morrison's voice was warm with satisfaction as she delivered the news that the school board had voted unanimously to create a new position. Educational support specialist, designed specifically to utilize Ethan's therapeutic background within the school environment. "They were impressed with your presentation," Morrison said, "and frankly, they were more concerned about losing good teachers than they were about managing theoretical risks." When Cassandra shared the news with Lila that afternoon, her daughter's response was characteristically direct and joyful. "Does this mean Mr. Cross gets to keep helping kids?" "It means he gets to help even more kids, in a bigger way." "Good, because there are lots of kids who need someone to listen to them, not just me." That evening, as they tended their expanding garden and checked on the mysterious green shoot that had grown another inch toward the light, Cassandra found herself thinking about the strange alchemy of timing and trust that had brought them all together. How close they'd come to missing each other entirely. How many small choices had led to this moment of possibility. Mom. Lila's voice carried the weight of important thoughts. Yes, sweetheart. I think our family is growing, like the plants. Cassandra looked at her daughter, this wise child, who understood instinctively what adults often missed, and felt her heart expand with gratitude for all the unexpected gifts that had emerged from their season of silence and struggle. I think you're right, she said softly. I think we're all growing. And as the three of them sat together in the gathering dusk, tending their small garden of hope, Cassandra finally understood what Ethan had been trying to teach them from the beginning, that the most beautiful things in life couldn't be rushed or controlled or demanded into existence. They could only be invited, nurtured, and trusted to bloom in their own perfect time. The weeks that followed the school board meeting unfolded like pages in a book that none of them had expected to write together. Ethan's transition into his new role as educational support specialist brought changes that rippled through Lincoln Elementary in ways both subtle and profound. His small office, formerly a converted storage room, was relocated to a proper space near the guidance counselor's suite, complete with windows that faced the playground and shelves for the growing collection of plants that students brought him. Cassandra found herself drawn to the school more frequently, not out of maternal anxiety, but from genuine curiosity about this community her daughter inhabited. She volunteered for field trip chaperoning, something she'd never had time for during her marriage, and discovered the joy of watching Lila interact with her peers in an environment where she felt safe and heard. Look how she's explaining things to Tommy, Ethan said quietly, during a visit to the Chicago History Museum, where Lila had appointed herself interpreter of a Native American garden exhibit. She's using the same patience you've been learning to use with her. Cassandra watched her daughter demonstrate to a confused classmate how corn beans and squash grew together in mutually beneficial relationships, each plant supporting the others in ways that created abundance for all. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. This was what they'd been building together, this careful cultivation of space where everyone could thrive. She's becoming a teacher, Cassandra observed. Like her mother. I'm not a teacher. Aren't you? You taught an entire school board that sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected sources. You taught me that fighting for something doesn't always mean destroying the opposition. The observation surprised her. Cassandra had spent so many years thinking of herself as a warrior, someone who conquered rather than cultivated. But watching Lila share knowledge with gentle authority, she began to see the possibility of different kinds of strength. November brought the first real test of their evolving relationship, when James called to announce his intention to take Lila for Thanksgiving, his first attempt at extended visitation since moving to California. She can stay with Rebecca and me for a long weekend, he said over the phone, his voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Rebecca's really looking forward to meeting her properly. Cassandra felt her old instincts flare, the need to control, to protect, to fight this intrusion into the fragile stability they'd built. But Lila was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while simultaneously conducting a conference with her plant collection, and the sight reminded Cassandra of everything she'd learned about trust and letting go. What does Lila want? She asked, surprising herself with the question. What do you mean? I mean, have you asked her if she wants to spend Thanksgiving in California? Because she hasn't seen you since August, and a lot has changed since then. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. James had always been someone who made decisions first and dealt with the emotional consequences later, a trait that had contributed significantly to the destruction of their marriage. She's my daughter too, Cassandra. I have rights. You do, but she has rights too. The right to be consulted about major disruptions to her routine especially when she's finally found her footing again. Disruptions. I'm her father, not a disruption. The pain in his voice was real, and despite everything that had passed between them, Cassandra felt a flicker of sympathy. James hadn't chosen to be the absent parent any more than she'd chosen to be the overwhelmed single mother trying to heal a traumatized child. I know you are, and I think Lila should see you. But maybe we could start smaller. Maybe you could come here for a day or two instead of taking her across the country to meet people she doesn't know. Rebecca isn't people she doesn't know. Rebecca is going to be her stepmother. The word hit like a physical blow, even though Cassandra had known it was coming. Rebecca, the young marketing executive who'd been the catalyst for their divorce, was now pregnant with James's child, and apparently eager to play house with the daughter he'd essentially abandoned. Then maybe it's even more important that Lila have some control over how that introduction happens, Cassandra managed. She's been through a lot this year. She deserves to feel safe in whatever arrangement we make. When she hung up the phone, Cassandra found Ethan standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of tea and an expression of quiet concern. Everything okay? James wants to take Lila to California for Thanksgiving, to meet his pregnant fiancée and play happy family for a long weekend. And how do you feel about that? The question was so like him, not asking what she planned to do or how she intended to fight it, but simply checking in with her emotional reality. 6 months ago, she would have been drafting legal arguments and researching custody modifications before the conversation ended. Now she found herself actually considering her feelings instead of her strategic options. Terrified, she admitted. Not because I think he'll hurt her, but because I'm afraid she'll come back different. More withdrawn, more confused about where she belongs. And what does Lila think? As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lila appeared in the kitchen with Violet in her arms and a thoughtful expression on her face. I heard the phone ring, she said simply. Was that Daddy? Cassandra exchanged a glance with Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, sweetheart. He wants to see you for Thanksgiving. He's invited you to visit him in California. Lila considered this information that with her characteristic gravity, unconsciously stroking Violet's leaves as she processed. For how long? He suggested a long weekend, 4 or 5 days. That's a long time to be away from home. It is. How does that make you feel? Scared, Lila said immediately, then looked surprised at her own honesty. I want to see Daddy, but I don't want to go somewhere new with people I don't know when everything here is just starting to feel right. The clarity of her emotional intelligence never ceased to amaze Cassandra. At 7, Lila understood the difference between wanting to maintain a relationship with her father and feeling ready for the complicated dynamics of his new life. What would feel right to you? Ethan asked gently. Maybe Daddy could come here. Just Daddy, not the new people yet. So we could talk about things that are just ours before I have to share him with a whole new family. The suggestion was so simple and so wise that Cassandra felt foolish for not thinking of it herself. Of course, Lila needed transition time, neutral territory, the chance to reconnect with her father before being thrust into his new domestic arrangement. I think that's a wonderful idea, Cassandra said. Would you like me to suggest that to Daddy? Yes. And maybe Mr. Cross could meet him too, since he's important to us now. The casual inclusion of Ethan in their family dynamics made Cassandra's heart skip. When had that happened? When had this man who'd started as a helpful stranger become so integral to their lives that Lila automatically assumed he belonged in significant family moments? If Mr. Cross is comfortable with that, Cassandra said carefully. I'd be honored, Ethan replied simply. The conversation with James that evening was predictably difficult. He alternated between hurt feelings and wounded pride, unable to understand why his daughter wouldn't want to see his new life, why his ex-wife was controlling the narrative of his relationship with Lila. "This isn't about control," Cassandra said with hard-won patience. "This is about giving a 7-year-old girl some agency in how she navigates a complicated situation. She's 7, Cassandra. She doesn't know what's best for her. She knows what feels safe to her. And right now, meeting your pregnant fiancé while staying in a house she's never seen in a city she doesn't know doesn't feel safe. So what, I'm supposed to come crawling back to Chicago like some kind of weekend visitor? You're supposed to put your daughter's emotional needs ahead of your ego, just like I've been learning to do." The conversation ended with reluctant agreement that James would fly to Chicago for Thanksgiving weekend, staying at a nearby hotel, and spending time with Lila in familiar environments. It wasn't the grand reunion he'd envisioned, but it was what their daughter needed. Preparing for James's visit brought unexpected challenges. Cassandra found herself cleaning house with nervous energy, rearranging furniture, and replacing flowers, as if domestic perfection could somehow smooth over the complicated emotions of having her ex-husband in the space she'd rebuilt as sanctuary. "You're spiraling," Ethan observed gently, finding her reorganizing the kitchen cabinets for the 3rd time that week. "I am not spiraling. I'm preparing." "For what, a home inspection?" Cassandra paused in her frantic cabinet rearrangement, suddenly seeing herself through his eyes, a successful attorney reduced to obsessive housekeeping by the prospect of her ex-husband's judgment. "I want him to see that we're okay," she admitted. "That Lila is thriving, that I'm not the cold, career-obsessed woman he always said I was. And what if he doesn't see that? What if he walks in here and finds fault with everything you've built?" The question hit at the heart of her anxiety. Despite everything, the divorce, the custody arrangements, the new life James had built without them, part of her still craved his approval, still wanted to prove that she'd been worth keeping. "Then I guess I'll remember that his opinion doesn't actually change anything about who we are or what we've accomplished." "And what have you accomplished?" Cassandra looked around their kitchen, taking inventory of the changes that had nothing to do with James and everything to do with the life she and Lila had built together. The windowsill garden where herbs grew in repurposed mason jars. The refrigerator covered with Lila's artwork and school notices that she actually read now. The breakfast table where they shared morning conversations about everything and nothing. "I've learned how to be present," she said quietly. "I've learned that my daughter is wise and funny and resilient in ways I never gave her credit for. I've learned that some of the most important work happens in silence and patience rather than action and argument. And I've learned that it's possible to love someone new without betraying what came before." Ethan's smile was soft and understanding, the expression of someone who knew intimately the courage required to risk caring again after loss. James is going to see all of that whether he acknowledges it or not. And more importantly, Lila is going to see how you handle his presence with grace instead of defensiveness, with confidence instead of anxiety. "I don't know if I'm capable of grace when it comes to James." "Then practice with me. Pretend I'm your difficult ex-husband coming to judge your life choices." What followed was an impromptu rehearsal session that dissolved into laughter as Ethan attempted to channel masculine arrogance and Cassandra practiced responses that prioritized Lila's comfort over her own defensive instincts. By the time they finished, she felt centered in a way that had nothing to do with perfect housekeeping and everything to do with knowing who she was and what she valued. James arrived on Thursday afternoon with an awkward combination of flowers for Cassandra and an expensive dollhouse for Lila that suggested he'd consulted toy store employees rather than his actual daughter about age-appropriate gifts. He looked good tanned from California sun, wearing clothes that suggested Rebecca's influence on his style choices, but there was a nervousness in his manner that reminded Cassandra of the young law student she'd fallen in love with 20 years earlier. "The house looks great," he said, accepting her offer of coffee and glancing around the kitchen with obvious surprise. "Different from how I remember it." "We've made some changes," Cassandra replied neutrally, not mentioning that most of the changes involved removing traces of their marriage and replacing them with evidence of actual life being lived. Lila's reunion with her father was cautious but warm, like reconnecting with a friend after a long absence. She showed him her plant collection, with careful pride explaining the care requirements of each species and the personalities she'd assigned to her favorites. "This is Violet," she said, presenting the African violet like a beloved pet. "She came home with us from the conservatory, and she's very social. She likes to hear about everyone's day." "She's beautiful," James said, though Cassandra could see him struggling to understand why his daughter was narrating plant psychology. "Would you like to tell her about your day?" "She's a very good listener." The request caught James off guard, and Cassandra watched him wrestle with embarrassment and the desire to connect with his daughter on her terms. Finally, he knelt down to Violet's level and began a hesitant conversation about airplane flights and Chicago traffic, his voice growing more natural as Lila nodded encouragingly. "See, she likes you," Lila announced when he finished. "She's turning her leaves toward you, which means she wants to be friends." "How can you tell?" "Mr. Cross taught me how to read plant body language. He says plants are always communicating, but most people don't know how to listen." "Mr. Cross." And there it was, the moment Cassandra had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The introduction of Ethan into the complicated family equation, the acknowledgement that their lives had expanded to include someone James didn't know and couldn't control. "He's my friend from school," Lila explained simply. "He knows about growing things and listening and helping kids find their voices. He helped me remember how to talk again." James's expression shifted confusion, giving way to something that might have been gratitude or might have been threatened male pride. "I'd like to meet him." "He's coming for dinner tomorrow night," Lila announced. "Mom invited him because he's part of our family now." The casual declaration hung in the air like a challenge. Cassandra felt her breath catch, waiting for James's reaction to this evidence that their life had moved forward without him in ways both significant and permanent. "Part of your family," James repeated carefully. "Yes, like how Rebecca is part of your family now. Except Mr. Cross isn't having a baby, he's just having us." The child logic of the comparison was flawless and devastating. Lila had grasped the essential truth that adults often missed, that families expand and contract and reconfigure themselves around love and commitment rather than legal documents or social conventions. "I see," James said quietly, and Cassandra could see him processing this information, trying to fit it into his understanding of who they were and what they'd become. The rest of the afternoon passed in careful navigation of neutral topics, school friends, Lila's favorite movies and books. James was trying. Cassandra could see that, but there was a formality to his interactions with their daughter that spoke of time lost and relationships that required rebuilding from the ground up. "She's different," he said quietly that evening when Lila had gone to bed. They were sitting in the living room sharing a bottle of wine and the awkward intimacy of former spouses trying to figure out how to be functional co-parents. "She's 7, Cassandra replied. "She's supposed to be different from when she was 6. "That's not what I mean. She's more, I don't know, centered, confident. Like she knows who she is in a way that most adults don't. She's been through a lot this year. Trauma either breaks you or teaches you what you're made of. And what is she made of?" Cassandra considered the question, thinking of her daughter's quiet wisdom, her capacity for forgiveness, her ability to see beauty and possibility in unexpected places. Resilience, compassion, the kind of strength that comes from learning to trust yourself even when the world feels unreliable. Like her mother. The compliment surprised her. During their marriage, James had criticized those same qualities as coldness, control, emotional unavailability. Now, filtered through divorce and distance and the perspective of his own failures, he seemed to see them differently. "I wasn't very strong when our marriage was falling apart," Cassandra said honestly. "I was angry and defensive and completely lost about how to fix what was breaking. We both were. I just dealt with it by running away instead of fighting." They sat in silence for a while, two people who'd once planned to spend their lives together, now trying to figure out how to share the life they'd created in their daughter. "Tell me about him," James said finally. "This Mr. Cross, who's become part of your family." The question could have been loaded with jealousy or resentment, but James's tone was surprisingly neutral, the voice of someone genuinely trying to understand rather than judge. "His name is Ethan. He was a speech therapist before he came to work at Lila's school. His wife died of early-onset Alzheimer's, and he needed time to figure out how to live without her. And he helped Lila start talking again. He helped her feel safe enough to start talking again. There's a difference." "Are you in love with him?" The direct question caught Cassandra off guard. She'd been expecting jealousy or territorial behavior, not genuine curiosity about her emotional life. "I think I am," she said carefully. "I know I care about him in ways I didn't think I was capable of anymore." "Good. I'm glad." "You're glad?" "I'm glad you found someone who makes you happy. I'm glad Lila has another adult in her life who cares about her well-being. I'm even glad that you've both moved forward in ways that don't include me, because it means you're okay without me." The unexpected grace in his response made Cassandra's throat tighten with emotion. This was the man she'd married, thoughtful, generous, capable of putting other people's happiness ahead of his own wounded pride. "We're okay," she confirmed. "But we're also glad you're here. Lila needs her father, James. Not the weekend visitor or the guilty gift giver, but the actual father who knows her and cares about her thoughts and feelings. I want to be that father. I just don't know how to do it from California." "Then maybe it's time to consider whether California is where you need to be." Friday evening arrived with the nervous energy of a diplomatic summit. Cassandra had spent the day second-guessing menu choices and table settings, trying to orchestrate a dinner that would allow two important men in her life to coexist peacefully, while her daughter watched and learned about how adults navigated complicated relationships. Ethan arrived early as she'd known he would, carrying a small potted herb garden that he'd assembled for Lila and a bottle of wine that suggested he understood the significance of the evening. "How are you feeling?" he asked, finding Cassandra in the kitchen, where she was obsessively checking the roast that didn't need checking. "Like a mediator trying to negotiate peace between warring factions, except the factions are the past and present of my personal life. And what if they don't negotiate successfully? Then I guess we learn to live with beautiful, complicated messiness instead of perfect resolution. I can live with beautiful, complicated messiness. Even if part of that messiness includes my ex-husband being more involved in our lives going forward." Ethan considered this question seriously, and Cassandra appreciated that he didn't offer automatic reassurance or dismissive platitudes. "James is Lila's father," he said finally. "That's not going to change regardless of geography or new relationships. And Lila deserves to have that relationship be as healthy and positive as possible. If that means more involvement from him, then I'll figure out how to make space for that. And if it means less space for you, Then we'll find new ways to create space for what matters. Love isn't a zero-sum game, Cassandra. There's room for everyone who's genuinely committed to Lila's well-being. The doorbell rang before she could respond, and suddenly James was there, standing in her hallway, with flowers and nervous energy, meeting the man who'd helped heal his daughter in ways he couldn't. "You must be Ethan," James said, extending his hand with careful courtesy. "I'm James Hale. Thank you for taking such good care of my girls." "It's been my privilege," Ethan replied, and Cassandra could hear the sincerity in his voice. "Lila is an extraordinary child. You should be very proud." "I am, and grateful. Cassandra tells me you were instrumental in helping her find her voice again." "Lila found her own voice. I just tried to create space where she felt safe enough to use it." The exchange was civilized, even warm, and Cassandra felt some of her tension ease as she watched two men she cared about navigate their first meeting with grace and mutual respect. Dinner conversation flowed more easily than anyone had expected. James asked intelligent questions about Ethan's background and therapeutic approach. Ethan shared stories about working with children that made James laugh and helped him understand his daughter's school experience in new ways. Lila conducted her usual plant consultations between courses, ensuring that everyone at the table had been properly introduced to her growing family of green friends. "Mr. Cross says that plants teach us about patience," Lila explained to her father, "because you can't make them grow faster by pulling on them or giving them more water. You just have to trust them to know what they need." "Is that what you needed?" James asked gently. "Time and space to grow at your own pace." Lila nodded seriously. "I wasn't ready to talk for a long time because talking felt dangerous. Like maybe if I said the wrong thing, more people would leave. But Mr. Cross never asked me to talk. He just listened to my silence until I was ready to fill it with words. Now I know that my words don't make people leave. And even if they did, I'd still be okay because I know how to take care of myself and the people I love." The conversation continued long after dessert was finished, ranging from practical discussions about school schedules and holiday arrangements to deeper explorations of what it meant to build healthy families from the fragments of broken ones. By the time James left for his hotel, plans had been made for him to spend more time in Chicago, to be more present in Lila's day-to-day life, rather than a distant figure who appeared for major holidays and guilt-driven gift exchanges. "That went better than I expected," Cassandra said, as she and Ethan cleaned up the kitchen while Lila gave her plants their evening updates. "He's a good man who made some bad choices, but he's trying to do better." "Are you okay with him being more involved, really?" Ethan paused in his dish drying to look at her directly. "Are you asking if I am threatened by your ex-husband wanting to be a better father to his daughter?" "I guess I am." "Then the answer is no. I'm not threatened by love, Cassandra. I'm not threatened by other people caring about you and Lila. If anything, it makes me feel more secure knowing that she has multiple adults invested in her well-being. And what about us? What happens to us if James decides to move back to Chicago? What do you want to happen to us?" The question hung in the air, loaded with possibility and fear and the courage required to build something new on the foundation of hard-won wisdom. "I want to keep growing," Cassandra said quietly. "I want to keep learning how to love without controlling how to support, without fixing how to build a life that has room for complexity and change and the beautiful messiness of real relationships. With me, with you." Ethan set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully, his expression serious and tender in the kitchen light. "Cassandra Hale," he said formally, "would you like to keep figuring out this beautiful, complicated life together? All of us, you and me and Lila, and even James when he's in town, and Rebecca when she's ready, and whoever else becomes important to our expanding definition of family. Are you proposing to me over dirty dishes? I'm proposing that we stop treating this like a temporary arrangement and start building something intentional. Something that can weather changes and challenges and the inevitable messiness of people trying to love each other well. Is that a yes to marriage? That's a yes to commitment, to partnership, to choosing each other every day and figuring out the details as we go. Before Cassandra could respond, Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway with Violet in her arms and a knowing expression on her face. "Are you getting married?" she asked with characteristic directness. "We're talking about it," Cassandra said carefully. "Good, because Violet says she likes Mr. Cross's energy, and she's usually right about people." "What else does Violet say?" Ethan asked seriously. "She says that families are like gardens. They work best when everyone has what they need to grow, and when the gardeners understand that different plants need different kinds of care." The wisdom of it filtered through a 7-year-old, and her beloved plant struck Cassandra as the most profound truth she'd ever heard about love and commitment, and the courage required to tend the invisible seeds of possibility. 6 months later, on a warm May morning that promised summer, Cassandra stood in Lincoln Elementary's renovated garden watching Lila address the school's end-of-year assembly. Her daughter, now 8, confident and radiant, with the kind of inner light that comes from being genuinely seen and understood, spoke into a microphone with the poise of someone who'd learned that her voice mattered. "When I stopped talking last year," Lila said to an audience of students, parents, and faculty, "I thought maybe I didn't have anything important to say. But Mr. Cross taught me that silence can be just as important as words, and that when you're ready to speak, people will listen." Cassandra felt Ethan's hand find hers, warm and steady as they watched their daughter, because that's what she'd become, their daughter in every way that mattered, share her story with characteristic wisdom and grace. "I want to thank Mr. Cross for teaching me about plants and patience and the courage it takes to grow. I want to thank my mom for learning how to listen without trying to fix everything. And I want to thank my dad for coming back to be part of our garden, even though it looks different than he expected." James, sitting in the front row with Rebecca and their 6-month-old son, smiled through tears that matched Cassandra's own. His decision to relocate his business to Chicago hadn't been easy, but watching him discover how to be the father Lila deserved had been one of the unexpected gifts of their complicated new normal. "But mostly," Lila continued, "I want to thank all the plants and flowers and growing things that taught me the most important lesson of all, that everything blooms in its own time, and beautiful things are worth waiting for." The applause was thunderous, but what Cassandra remembered most was the moment afterward, when Lila ran to their small group and threw her arms around all of them, Cassandra and Ethan, James and Rebecca, even baby Michael, who gurgled contentedly in his carrier, surrounded by the chaotic love of his complicated family. "We did it," Lila whispered as they walked home through streets lined with spring flowers. "We grew a real family." "We did." Cassandra agreed, thinking of all the seasons they'd weathered together, all the invisible seeds that had been planted in silence and darkness and patient hope. That evening, as they tended their expanded garden, where dozens of plants now thrived in carefully arranged harmony, Cassandra found herself thinking about the mysterious green shoot that had started it all. It had turned out to be a daffodil, golden and resilient, blooming faithfully each spring, as a reminder that the most beautiful things often emerge from the longest seasons of waiting. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, finding her standing among the flowers with that familiar expression of quiet contemplation. "I'm thinking about timing," she said, leaning into his embrace as they watched Lila conduct her evening conference with her beloved plants, about how everything had to happen exactly the way it did for us to end up here. "Do you believe in destiny?" I believe in choice. I believe in the courage it takes to stay open to possibility even when you're afraid. I believe in the kind of love that makes space for growth and change, and the beautiful unpredictability of people becoming who they're meant to be. And what are you meant to be? Cassandra considered the question, looking around at the life they'd built together, not perfect, not simple, but authentic and alive and full of the kind of joy that comes from tending something precious with patient hands. Happy, she said simply. I'm meant to be happy. We all are. As the sun set over their garden and their daughter's laughter mixed with the sound of water trickling through soil, Cassandra finally understood what Ethan had been trying to teach them from the beginning, that the most profound transformations happen not through force or will or careful planning, but through the simple act of showing up each day with open hearts and the willingness to tend whatever wants to grow. In the gathering dusk, surrounded by the people and plants they'd learned to love with patience and wisdom, Cassandra Hale finally felt like she'd come home to herself. And in that moment of perfect clarity, she knew that every season of silence, every moment of doubt, every careful choice to trust rather than control had led them to exactly where they belonged together, growing, blooming in their own perfect time. The story of the mute girl who found her voice became the story of a family that learned to listen, and in learning to listen, discovered that the most beautiful conversations happen not in words alone, but in the quiet spaces between them, where love grows patient and strong and eternally hopeful like flowers reaching toward the light.